Here's one thing all prospective parents should do before they bring a child into the world: make a parenting agreement. Think of it like a parenting prenup. Now, if you already have children, don't worry. It's never too late to create this kind of document. You'll probably make a better one than we did, because when my co-parents and I developed our agreement, we had no idea what really went into making a baby and raising a child. We just knew that we were doing something a little different, and we wanted a framework for it. If you're new here, I'm a member of a 3-parent family. Myself and my husband live with our platonic co-parent. We're raising one child together and expecting our second in June. And having 3 parents at home has a lot of advantages, especially when it comes to the spread of domestic labor. However, there are also more opportunities for disagreement, because 3 people means 3 opinions on everything. So when we were initially making this plan for our family dynamic, we knew we wanted to have a document that outlined what we were doing together and discussed potential issues that could show up down the road. Keep in mind that all 3 of us come from families that experienced some kind of breakdown during our childhood, so we know what's at stake when people fail to co-parent together effectively. So we began to research things on our own. We attended some local workshops held at the LGBT Center. Those were more designed for people using like donors or surrogates, but they had a lot of really useful information in there. And that's where we got the idea for a parenting agreement. Then when we got really serious about trying to conceive, we started to have bi-weekly meetings where we discussed this agreement in detail. We also looked at some of the things that are brought up in the Ontario Guide for Separating Families to work through potential family breakdowns well before we were all in a place where emotions are high and there's an actual child's life at stake. Key topics in our agreement include living arrangements and parenting schedules, vacations, holidays, special days, healthcare, education, extracurricular activities, religion and culture, extended family, parental health, gender expression, and a section for additional details. So let's get into each of these topics, and I will give you the rundown on what some of the key points were in there for us and how they've actually shown up in our day-to-day lives as people who now have a 3-year-old and are about to have our second baby. Under the section for living arrangement and parenting schedules, we knew that we wanted to live together. That was the goal. We agreed to make and keep a shared budget and have our costs split in an equitable manner. For instance, whoever was carrying the child would also likely have to take serious time off work, like at least a year, to provide child care and also recover from birthing. So we knew that that person would be paying in a little bit less to the family budget during that time. We also created a collective goal to save at least $5,000 before our child was born. This would allow us to have some money in the bank if for any reason we all needed to take time off work for an extended period of time, or if there were any unexpected expenses related to the child. We also knew that sometimes separation does occur, so we agreed that if that was to happen, we would not live further than an hour apart from each other during our child's upbringing. In the next section on vacation, holidays, and special days, we talked about making an equitable split of family time. As you can imagine, having 3 parents means having 3 extended families, and our families are really spread across Canada. Mine is largely in the prairies, my husband's is largely on the East Coast, and our co-parents is in Ontario, but kind of far from where we live. We agreed to have things like rotating family holidays whenever possible. We also agreed to try to have a family trip at least once per year, even if it's just camping for the weekend. Regarding holidays, our family is fairly agnostic, practicing mainly reclaiming witchcraft. So we agreed to celebrate things like Samhain, winter solstice, summer solstice, observing the moon cycles. And keep in mind that while we're making this document, we're also just having conversations about these things, some of which don't get written down, but it gives us an opportunity to talk about our values. For instance, we discussed at this point whether or not we wanted to do Christian holidays like Christmas, and if we did do Christmas, if we would include Santa. Spoiler, we basically decided to celebrate stuff with our family because a lot of us come from Christian families, so we'll do Christmas with them, but we're not going to do Santa with our kid or try to push Christian holidays on our child. The next section was healthcare, and the very first thing we needed to discuss, because we were trying to make a baby, was the possibility of abortion. We agreed if there was any threat to the gestational parent's life, that their life was a priority, although it was ultimately up to the gestational parent if they would terminate a pregnancy. We also discussed the possibility that our child could be diagnosed with a disability while in utero and what we would do in that scenario. If it was not a life-threatening disability, that child would still be carried to term. We also talked about potential urgent medical situations like during the birth. And in a scenario where we couldn't meet and have a consensus on a topic, we agreed to trust each other and trust healthcare professionals on the appropriate treatment plan. We also agreed that medical costs were to be shared equitably. So for instance, if our co-parent needed pelvic floor physiotherapy to do with the birth, that was a shared family expense and we would all pay into it in an equitable manner based on our incomes. Now, for postpartum, we agreed that the non-gestational co-parents would take time off in an equitable manner and that everybody would share the responsibility of childcare, but that the gestational parent needed priority for recovery because they just went through a birth. And what ended up happening during that period was that my husband took 6 weeks off and then went back to work. I ended up taking kind of a year off and working part-time, and our co-parent took a full year off, actually 18 months. So our child had at least one, often two parents available full-time at home, and we still had money coming in through my husband and I working. Now, back to the healthcare stuff, we agreed that our child would be vaccinated for everything and anything that they could be vaccinated for. We also agreed to collectively discuss and take responsibility for our child's health and well-being. So for instance, during the newborn phase, we all got this app that tracked things like their sleep cycles and bowel movements and everything and made sure that it was synced on all our phones so we could all just be clued in. We agreed to maintain regular medical visits for our child, dental checkups when they got older, that kind of thing. And when it came to long-term medical care for our child, we agreed to take the advice of experts into account while also paying attention to our child's well-being. And as our child gets older, we agreed to support them in accessing whatever medical care they felt was necessary as well. For instance, mental health care. That clause was in there because when I came out to my parents as trans, when I was a teenager, I explicitly asked them to get me a psychologist and they kind of refused, which was a huge challenge for me when I was experiencing such mental distress, and I would never want to put my own child through that. Now, in the education section, the first thing we agreed on was that public education was our preference. We also agreed to prioritize educational programming that was social justice oriented, anti-racist, anti-oppressive. We agreed that all parents share a responsibility for a child's education, that at least one parent should attend things like parent-teacher conferences, that educational decisions should be made by consensus, and that we would share costs for educational supplies and related programming, and share responsibility for things like school pickup. We also talked about the possibility of educational breaks, like we would believe our child if they said they were too sick for school. Again, this is something informed by my own childhood, where there were days where I felt sick and my parents didn't believe me and thought I was faking. So we said we would agree to support our child in that regard, that we would support at least 3 family days or mental health days as well. At the same time, we agreed not to excessively withdraw our child from school and that we would encourage consistent attendance. We also agreed to seek out multilingual programs and educational activities, which brings us to the extracurricular section. Number one thing we agreed was that we support arts, athleticism, and literacy. Our goals for our child's baby years would be to attend things like baby swim class, baby song, reading groups. And throughout their childhood, goals would include more swimming classes, bike riding, gymnastics, and at least one instrument or singing lessons. Again, we agreed an equitable split of cost and labor regarding scheduling, expenses, supplies, and transport. Now, if there's one person who's staying at home more, they are going to be the one, say, actually taking our child to practice or to lessons more frequently. But that is what makes it an equitable split so that other people can work and help prop up the expenses of those kind of things. In the religion and culture section, the first thing we agreed to was religious activities need to be decided on by consensus. So we would educate our child about different religions, different spiritualities. As I mentioned, we would celebrate pagan holidays. We also agreed to participate in events like Halloween, family holidays. And we wanted to intentionally involve our child in cultural events and education beyond our own little sphere. So for instance, conversations about racism, colonialism, white supremacy, power and privilege were all integral to our family home and also something we would seek out. We also wanted to educate our child on things like cultural appropriation or cultural appreciation. What's the difference? We also wanted to get them involved in attending local cultural events and festivals beyond our little sphere and have them broaden their view of the world as a result. This was something that was really suggested by one of my co-parents who felt like they grew up in like quite a little bubble and that they did not get a broader view of the world until they were basically a young adult. We wanted to make sure that our child grew up understanding that the world is beautiful, huge, and diverse. One of the ways we could do this practically was introduce them to a variety of music, a variety of different cuisines. Living in Toronto at the time, it was very easy to help cultivate a broad palette. We also agreed to introduce our child to a variety of languages like French, Spanish, ASL, and educate our child on how words have power and what words could be inappropriate, what words can do violence, and how to speak to each other with respect. In the extended family section, we talked about how it would be tricky to try to facilitate regular family visits since we're all spread out, but that we would work to facilitate active communication with extended relatives whenever possible, even through things like video calls or letter writing. We also agreed to educate our child on the existing dynamics in our families at an age appropriate pace and make sure that they are supported in having a safe and healthy relationship with our families, especially given that some of our relatives are less safe to be around than others. That section was something that was really informed by our own childhoods, knowing that there was something like wrong or that there was some kind of disagreement in the family, but not having anybody tell us the actual details. We did not want to reproduce that with our own kid. Now, we did already have like a general health section, but we also made a section just on parental health. And the first thing we agreed on in there is that if one of us is struggling with our physical health or mental health, we communicate that to the group. And if one of us sees someone else is struggling and maybe doesn't know it, that we would support direct and compassionate intervention. And that we all agreed to seek the support of healthcare professionals as necessary. Now, we also talked conception in this section, and we agreed the goal was to have at least 2 children. And for the first child, we would use the eggs of the parent willing to be pregnant, namely our co-parent, and my husband's sperm. He's the only one who makes sperm in the family because I'm trans. For the second child, we agreed we'd consider using the eggs of the non-caring parent, namely me, if we could afford it, which is what we ended up doing. Our second child is biologically the offspring of myself and my husband and being carried by our co-parent using reciprocal IVF. We also created a section in here for the non-bio parent to just sort of have their feels and have them be heard and validated by the others in the group, and made an agreement that the non-bio parent should have at least the option to pass on their last name to the child as a way to signify their relationship. Now, in the gender expression section, we agreed to adopt a gender expansive approach, what later we would describe as gender creative parenting, where we celebrate all forms of expression and identity and provide a variety of options in terms of clothing, toys, etc. What we actually did not write down, but then later agreed to, was to also use neutral language for our child whenever possible, including pronouns until they were able to voice their own preference. And we did write down that we would support our child as they develop their own sense of identity and act as their advocate as needed. We agreed to select a gender neutral name and to support our child changing their name if that was their preference. We agreed to educate our child about pronouns and identity expression from a very young age in an age appropriate manner. We did agree, however, to assign our child M or F at birth for their safety and well-being. Now, the additional details section kind of goes all over the place, but this was kind of where we dumped like a bunch of things that we couldn't really figure out where to put them. So things like we agreed to collectively provide basic safety for our child, like baby-proofing our home. We made like a subsection in here as well for discipline and lifestyle. So agreeing, for instance, to make a family schedule and routine and to stick to it, to not discipline our child in an abusive manner and to hold each other accountable if we see each other doing this, agreeing not to raise our voices to each other or to the child, agreeing to apologize to our child and each other if we make a mistake so we can model accountability, explaining the reasoning for our rules whenever possible to our child, not really practicing that like you'll do it because I told you to mindset. We also talked about things like screen time. We agreed to limit screen time for the first 2 years of our child's life, to set clear boundaries around screen time, talk to our child openly about what the screens are, what this technology is, and when they're interested in having their own technology, setting clear expectations and limits around that, and limiting our own phone usage to model healthy habits. We had a section on gifts. We really did not want our child to receive excessive or inappropriate gifts, and we agreed to address this on a case-by-case basis. And we also agreed not to try to gain our own child's affection through material gifts, which is something that we had experienced, at least 2 out of 3 of us, during our parents' divorces, where one parent would suddenly like throw gifts on us or have a step parent do that. And it really actually had the opposite effect, where as children, we could tell that we were trying to be bought, and it was not appealing. We talked about photographs and videos of our child. We agreed that we could post pictures of our child, but we ended up later agreeing to cover their face. And we also agreed that any photo posted by one parent could be removed upon request by another. We agreed to never post naked pictures of our children anywhere, even just like in the bathtub. We agreed to never use our child's image for profit, and we agreed to maintain a print photo collection and take family photos as an annual tradition. That was something my husband did with his family, and he really loved it growing up. We talked about family pets. We agreed that it requires consensus to bring an animal into our home, and we would have to discuss who would be the primary pet parent. We agreed to work with a trainer whenever possible. So, for instance, if we got a dog, they would go to puppy training. Finally, we had a section on the involvement of additional partners in chosen family, particularly because we're a married couple parenting with somebody who is single, and my husband and I are also polyamorous. We know that there could be more people involved in our family dynamic, and we wanted to get way ahead of that conversation. So we agreed from the start that the three of us are our child's birth parents, and our role and relationship to our child is unique. We also agreed that additional partners could join our family dynamic, but they would not automatically be a co-parent. If they wanted to become a co-parent, they would need to be strongly communicative, involved with the rest of the group, and willing to take several years to build up that kind of trust. Additional partners in chosen family can play smaller but important roles in our child's life. For instance, like aunties, uncles, ankies, etc. That brought us to the end of our parenting agreement, and it was pages and pages long by this point, with lots and lots of details that I have not even included in this video. And it took months to create, almost a year. But once it was all on paper and we felt like it looked good, there were a few final things we wanted to agree on about the document itself. One, that it was a living document, that it could be adjusted by consensus. Two, that we would continue to have regular meetings. And we do, although it's more like monthly, bi-monthly now. Three, that we would agree to compromise when realistic, because we just knew there were things we could not know at the time of creating this document together. And four, that we would involve a third party if we ever needed to dispute the document with each other or anything else related to our parenting. At the bottom of the document, we wrote our names, and this created the parenting agreement as we know it now. These days, this agreement is really interesting to me as it was developed before we had any hands-on experience as actual co-parents. Now, these days, it's interesting to look at this document because it was developed before we had any real hands-on experience as co-parents. And there are some things that I think we might have done differently, but largely, I think it holds up pretty well. And we have revisited a few times in moments of disagreement. For instance, when we weren't super sure we wanted to have a second kid, but we didn't use the document to kind of police and control each other, but instead to remind one another what we had originally envisioned and why, and then discuss if that had changed. We have yet to make any significant changes to this document, and the document itself has actually come in handy a few times. For instance, when we applied for a childcare subsidy and we needed to show some kind of material or document to demonstrate that we were actively co-parenting, this is what we shared. So if you are planning on having a child, or maybe you already have one together and you're raising that child with another person or people, I really do recommend you create a document like this. And you might be saying, well, we're a two-parent family, we're a traditional household, we don't really need something like this complicated. Sure, that's your decision. But I will say, it would be better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. Because it's so handy to have something that we created when we were all calm, level-headed, and we're able to really sit down and listen to each other rather than trying to figure it out when tensions are high. And even two-parent households have lots of people involved in them, like extended relatives, chosen family, etc. So if you have a child or children, or you're planning to have one, it's never too late to make an agreement like this, and I encourage you to start making time for it now. I, for one, am very thankful that my co-parents and I sat down to make this document together, and even if we never ended up using it for resolving a dispute, it was a really important part of our process in making intentional time to agree to be a family. So let me know if you plan to make a parenting agreement, what you might put in yours, or maybe you've already made one and it looks different than ours. I would love to hear about it. And don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you again in another video next week.